I'll say that the recovery project does now that I really enjoy is like when we were 23 and doing it, I was like, oh, the most punk rock thing you can do is like save the world by doing theater. Like I really
Yeah.
believed
Yeah.
like we were going to put on plays and they were going to change the world.
Right. Yeah.
And then along the way, it became about like, subscribers like their seats and how do we get them to keep their seats and they like to
Exactly.
come on Thursday and and in the same way, like you start answering racist emails and you're like, is this what I thought we were doing? And once we got into the recovery project and we started doing the white chip, it has that punk rock feeling again. It has that feeling of like, oh, we're doing plays to save the world.
Yeah. That was the voice of director, playwright, and anti-stigma warrior Sean Daniels. Sean is my guest today on the Page and Stage podcast, and I'm your host, Jason Cannon. Some quick housekeeping before we get to my conversation with Sean. First, a reminder that May is National Mental Health Awareness Month, and this episode is the second in a trilogy devoted to storytellers working to reduce the stigma around mental illness and normalize mental health. Last week was Carrie Seidman, and I encourage you to listen to her story if you missed it. This week is Sean, and next week I'll be talking with Scott Ehrenpreis. Now, Scott and I are going off-Broadway this summer with our play Clowns Like Me, which is Scott's humorous and heartfelt one-man show about living with mental illness. Like lots of mental illness. It's Scott's story. I am honored to be the writer-director. But if you can't get to New York this summer, never fear. We are doing 5 performances in Sarasota, Florida, May 23 to May 26. Every show has a talkback. That's true here. That'll be true in New York. And Sean Daniels, actually, my guest today, he will be leading the talkback after the Friday, May 24th matinee. You can get all the info and tickets over at clownslikeme.com, and I'll put that link in the show summary as well. Make it easy for you. Another way to make sure you always get the info about my shows and book launches and classes is to sign up for the Page and Stage newsletter. No, that's right. Now, Page and Stage is more than a podcast. If you head over to pageandstage.art, that's pageandstage.art, you will have access to all the podcast episodes. You can also sign up for the weekly newsletter, which comes out every Friday morning. You can check out the newest releases at Ibis Books, which is the publishing wing of Page and Stage. And you can even set up some story coaching with me if you've got that play or memoir or speech that needs a kick in the pants. And if you're finding value in this podcast, you can also click support and make a donation or become a backer to help offset the cost of producing this podcast. I keep all the content free to listeners, no paywall, no subscription, just support from listeners like you. Now, as for my guest today, Sean Daniels, he is an internationally known theater director, writer, and artistic director. He's known for new work and innovative community-based leadership. Sean is currently the director of the anti-stigma campaign for Live Tampa Bay, and he's the director of the Recovery Project at Florida Studio Theater. Most importantly, though, and he insisted I tell you this, Sean shares his life with Veronica and Vivian in sunny Sarasota, Florida. Sean also is a person in long-term recovery. He's been a public advocate for change in the arts field. His play, The White Chip, was a New York Times Critics' Pick. It's been performed around the world as a catalyst for community conversation and connection. It just closed another New York City run just a couple weeks ago, and this production was produced by Hank Azaria, Jason Biggs, and Tony winners John Larroquette and Annalee Ashford. Sean is out there doing the thing. American Theater Magazine even called Sean one of the top 15 up-and-coming artists in the United States whose work will be transforming America's stages for decades to come. How about that? Here we go with my conversation with Sean Daniels. I am sitting here with the brilliant and multifaceted Sean Daniels, writer, director, producer, director of various projects, which we're going to talk about. Sean, thank you so much for having me in your gorgeous, you call it middle-class home. It is a Florida beaut.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. If you ever move into a home that you're going to work on, don't live there while you're working.
Don't.
This is the bit of advice I have to pass on to everyone.
This is brilliant. This is so far advanced of what we were going to talk about.
That's right.
But
That's
yes,
right. Yeah.
if you're going to rehab a home, don't live in it while you
Yeah,
do
we
it.
were like, oh, we'll live, we'll fix it up, be great, we'll pick everything. We're like, oh no, this was
This is an 80s movie.
that's right. Yep.
Sean, because you juggle so many balls and spin so many plates, you moved to Florida to take on some really personal, important projects. Would you just tell us about those two projects really quickly, your roles and what their missions are?
Sure. So I'm a person in long-term recovery. I've been sober for 12 years, 13 if I make it to October 12th this year.
I believe in you.
Thank you. And, post-pandemic, I wasn't, when you're an artistic director, you have to be so good at like different groups of people, making them feel heard, making them feel like they're a part of it. And I just wasn't as good anymore after the pandemic with either racist groups or groups that were just interested in going back or, people, we would do plays and, we would have different people of color playing siblings and we would get complaints. And I used to be able to figure out like what's a smart way to be able to engage in that conversation and try to move it forward. And, for me, we all know through the pandemic, right? Not only did we lose so many people to COVID, but in terms of addiction, numbers went through the roof.
The isolation and the mental health.
The isolation and the number of people who are suffering. And now we're up to now post-pandemic, right? Every single person listening to this is more likely to die from a fentanyl overdose than they are from a car accident, regardless of whether you use fentanyl or not.
Okay, so two really quick things.
Yeah.
One, to be clear for everyone, you were the artistic director of
Arizona Theater
Company before you came to Florida. So when you're talking about being an AD, that's the context there. And two, would you repeat that? That's a new stat for me, and I want to make sure I heard it right.
So the number one killer of Americans 18 to 45 is drug overdose.
Wow.
And you are more likely to die from a drug overdose than you are from a car accident.
Wow. Okay.
So, or heart attack or cancer. It is by far, it's the number one killer. And that's just because the numbers have skyrocketed.
Mm-hmm.
Not only with the addition of fentanyl, but also with just in the pandemic, even my friends that don't have addiction issues, at some point we're like, I'm drinking too much. And like, I got to pull it back. So I feel like, and everyone is suffering mental health issues post-pandemic. It is a very different conversation.
Yeah.
And so, what I wanted to do was, I was complaining about having to, how do you move different groups along that, are tired of seeing women's stories on stage or tired of seeing people of color on stage. And I was like, and I remember complaining to somebody and they were like, well, what do you want to do? Like, what do you really want to do? And I thought like, God, if I could do anything, I would stop artists from overdosing. I would figure out how to do that because I don't know in our industry, how do we possibly look out for each other?
Yeah.
There was this great study that happened during the pandemic also about how do national narratives change. And they studied gay marriage, which is to say, when Barack Obama ran for president, he was against gay marriage, right? And even in our beloved state of Florida, you cannot say what he said 20 years ago and run for city council as a Democrat, right? So that narrative has changed.
Mm-hmm.
Some people would say like, oh my God, there's so many more gay youth today. And it's like, is that the case? Or have we just actually changed the narratives, in which case it is safer or more overall, people can come out and feel like that they're in a safe place to be able to do it, right? So the narrative has changed. And the thing that they found in studying narratives was that the thing that changed people's minds the most was the arts, which it was the movies that you see, that it was the books that you read, that it was Ellen comes out and everyone thinks her career is over, or even Magic Johnson comes out and is HIV positive.
Right.
I remember thinking like he's dead and he's going
to die in a month.
He's going to die in a month, right? He's already gone. 25 years later, he's in better shape than me.
Right.
Doing great out in the world. And, Queer Eye for the Straight Guy comes out and Will and Grace, and we all think that's crazy. And then Modern Family. And suddenly you can watch through the stories that we tell. Larry Kramer gets out at the public, and that is Reagan to suddenly talk about it. I mean, you can see that the arts play this huge thing. to the point now that it feels, when I say that Barack Obama was against gay marriage, people have trouble remembering that because
Right.
it seems unlikely that a Democratic candidate would be taking that stance going forward.
Right.
So we want to do the same thing for recovery and addiction. We want to figure out how do we change that. And I think we start by taking care of art.
So in terms of that narrative then, when someone asked you, what's the one thing you want to do, Sean, and you say, I want to help artists recover, are there stats? Is there a narrative about, are artists more prone to addictions or alcoholism? Or is it just that that's kind of the lane you understand and you live in, so you know how to reach them?
Well, there was a study about how artists suffer depression at a higher rate. But I also think anyone that's met 3 artists can tell you that that feels probably more likely to be true. Yeah, maybe a little low. Yeah. No, I just feel like I experience this being a person in recovery. If you ever watch a TV show and there's someone in recovery, like I promise you that they relapse at the end of season 1, or they go to a meeting room and it's like 6 weird people in a circle in a dirty basement chanting their name at you. So it's like, it's not represented at all in a way that you would think like, oh, I want to be a part of that. So I think that the arts are a great way for us to be able to change these narratives and to be able to do the same thing that happened for gay marriage, to be able to do it for recovery, which is just to say that, to know that people thrive afterwards, to know that people can get help. So one of the things that we did, that we're piloting, that will break on your podcast, is that for
well, it depends on when this drops.
Depending on when it drops, yeah. We're also just starting in Sarasota and Manatee County, like a warm line for artists. So any store administrator in Sarasota or Manatee County, if you are struggling, you call 1-833 okay I quit. And you just identify as an artist, and what happens is one of our peer-to-peer other artists in the country will be in touch with you in the next 24 hours to be able to get help. And the reason that we put this together was because in my studies, or in the research we did, we found that it exists in other industries.
Warm lines do.
Warm lines do, yeah. That they're like for lawyers, for airline pilots, for nurses. If you're struggling, your industry has a way for you to reach out, because no matter how cool your boss is, nobody wants to go tell your boss, I've actually been coked up for the last 3 days. So it's like, you call the warm line and you get somebody else who speaks
your language.
That's right. And wants to help you, walk you through kind of what are some resources to be able to do. So
say that number again.
So it's 1-833 okay I quit.
And for everyone out there, I'll put that into the show summary as well. And any links that we talk about, other resources, they'll all be in the show summary on the website. So Sean, as part of your own personal recovery, in terms of creating narrative, you wrote a play.
I did, yeah.
Called The White Chip.
Yeah.
This is a long runway for you. Like, what instigated that process for you? What was it like to write it? How autobiographical is it? And what kind of life is it having right now?
So I started writing it kind of right at the beginning. There's like a monologue in the show that I wrote when I was like on day 4 in rehab.
Wow.
And it's pretty much stayed unchanged through all, which is amazing, through all the edits that the show has gone through.
Seriously,
kind of the few things that have stayed. And I couldn't find, when I was trying to get sober, I couldn't find anything that had like a sense of humor, that was about science. For me, science was a huge part of it. Like I went in and I was very lucky. I found this group of men in Jacksonville, Florida that took me in. And they all, they were so excited when I was a newbie coming in, because they got to tell me about brain chemistry and neural pathways and brain plasticity and all these things that had never been mentioned to me before. And the fact that, addiction is 40 to 60% genetic. I mean, just like that fact in itself
does not get a lot of airtime.
It doesn't get a lot of airtime because we all kind of think like, well, I know it's technically a disease, but like, could Uncle Brian not be drunk this Thanksgiving?
Right, exactly.
So I feel like
the narrative is, why can't you control yourself?
That's right. Well, and we all grew up in the 80s, or those of us who grew up in the 80s, like with Just Say No.
Just Say No, Dare.
And Just Say No implies that the choice to stop is within you.
Always. That it's always and only.
That's right. That's right. That you can make it happen. And once I heard people talk about like, oh no, it's a brain disorder, And you're like, oh, well, that's a different conversation altogether.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to write, and the play is also a love letter to my mother who lives in Bradenton, Florida. So I started writing it.
And you betcha this was on day 4 of in rehab. So this was this like something someone suggested you do, or did this just manifest because you are a storyteller by trade, or?
I guess just because I'd spent my life making new plays, I thought like, oh, well, that's the world I understand and a way to process it.
Yeah.
I don't even know that at the beginning I knew I was writing a play.
Right.
I think I just tried to be like, I'm trying to get this down and figure out what happened. I mean, I think I was really trying to figure out like, how did I get here? What are the choices? Because the thing about like the brain disorder of addiction is I swear to God, sometimes I would be like, I'm going to be sober. I'm going to do everything I can. And then I would find myself drunk again. And I really didn't understand what it is. If you've ever, so apparently there's a little bit of science, like your brain has neural pathways with which your brain can help to organize not only the way you remember things, but the things that you do in order to have a dopamine high.
Yeah.
If you've ever gotten up in the morning, gotten ready for work, and you're driving to work and a car pulls out in front of you and you like wake up, you realize like your brain just tells you what to do for big chunks of it. And if your brain is organized to make sure that you are using every day, like literally you're in a fight with your brain.
It's almost like autopilot.
Yeah, very much
It's
so.
an operating system that learns your patterns to make things easier, so you can have bandwidth available for other things. But in this case, that it's neutral.
That's right.
It can be done. Those pathways can be effective and positive, or they can lead to things that are harmful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't get up and make every choice in the morning. No,
Right.
Your brain knows here's the 37 things we do
Right.
to get ready.
Put on your slippers, make the bed.
That's right.
Turn on the coffee.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And you realize you're not even thinking. You're thinking
Yeah.
about something else. Your brain is running it through things it needs to do. Right.
Yeah.
So if you have a brain disorder and your brain is in charge, then you may make other choices.
Mhm.
So I wanted to put that out there, and I produced the play at the theater I worked at, Merrimack Repertory Theater, in 2015. Then it happened at the City Theater in Pittsburgh in 2017, maybe. Then it happened in New York, 2019. And then it was supposed to come back in 2020, March 2020. Obviously, that did not happen. And it took 4 years to get from that, it's about to come back, till it just ran at MCC this past January. And what was kind of amazing about the journey of the play, when we talk about mental health and we talk about everything. So when we did it in 2019, we got amazing reviews, and and it was good. Like people came, it was like lightly sold out. We were great. And then we did it in 2024 and we got worse reviews. And you couldn't get a ticket.
Right.
Like you suddenly, like the response was huger to it, and we had like fantastic celebrities come on and add their name to it. Hank Azaria and John Larroquette and Jason Biggs. And, at opening night, we had Edie Falco and Oscar Isaac. And so suddenly like the conversation around mental health has clearly shifted in that period of time.
Yeah.
To be able that suddenly it's no longer like a small issue, like everybody understands it. So I feel like it's a little right place at the right time.
Yeah. I would even say that it's not so much that everyone understands it as everyone understands it needs to be understood.
Yeah.
You see it in athletes.
Yeah.
All the high profile athletes who are more and more talking to Ted Lasso. I mean, it's more in the popular narrative now.
Yeah. And I think we've all struggled with it, but it's always been, very quiet.
Yeah.
But, so here's another stat that we learned. 1 in 3 families is dealing with some kind of substance use disorder or condition, whether it's alcohol or drugs. And so you realize like 1 in 3 families. I mean, that means like anytime maybe 3 people together, it's one of them. So like it is very prevalent.
As you were starting to have productions, were you involved artistically in those productions? Were you just the playwright to the side? And follow-up question, what did that feel like? Was it therapeutic? Was watching your story... Follow-up question, Sean. Keep up.
Yeah.
Like, how autobiographical did that play end up being? And as you were editing, did you have to pull back from yourself, go deeper into yourself? There's like 85 questions in there. So I'm just...
yeah. Yeah. Well, Oscar Wilde says everything I wrote was true, even the stuff I made up.
Right.
And so I feel like that's because it is autobiographical, but we chose at some point along the way to change the main character's name from Sean to Stephen. So it felt like, because, you know, as like it didn't all happen in a easily understandable 90 minutes. You know? So it is true, but it's also like events are combined, people are combined, events are in different orders so that it's not confusing.
Yeah.
But, you know, every time we've done it, we've had, and especially at the beginning, we were like doing significant rewrites every time, just trying to find out like, what is the story and how do you tell it? And, you know, recovery stories kind of end in maintenance at the end, which is not theatrically interesting.
Yeah. Like, what's the climax?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you finally get sober. It's like, well, but that's
the beginning.
That's the beginning. But that's, you know, God, there was a whole season of Nurse Jackie where she got sober and everybody was like, come on, relapse. You know,
yeah, this is boring.
I know, and she did. And even I was like, yay, she's back, you know. So it's like how to structure a story like that. So we did, and even on this last time, which was our second commercial production, there were still some trims to do. And, you know, the thing is also it's a comedy.
Right.
About addiction, because we felt like, you know, I don't understand the world without comedy. And I don't know, especially for those of us that grew up with after school specials.
Yeah.
The idea of like a very special episode to talk about something also makes it feel very other and not part of the usual day of life. So we want to make it a comedy. So part of that is always adjusting, try to figure out listen, people laugh at different things in 2024 than they laughed at in 2019.
Oh, yeah.
And so funny. So there used to be in the show this like joke about Jimmy Buffett. And it was kill. It was like one of the like top 5 jokes of the show. Like it would bring the house down. And then we got the first preview and they made the Jimmy Buffett joke and the entire house went like, oh.
Yeah. Oh, no.
And we were like, oh, that's not the right response.
Rewrite that.
That's right. No, we had to... You know, we tried it out the second night just to be like, is it? Oh, no, it's gone. Everybody's a little sad now about Jimmy Buffett. And maybe be funny again in 5 more years.
Right.
But not now.
Tragedy plus time.
That's right. That's right. And so, you know, we're always trying to make adjustments. I will say the great thing about being a writer, when you've been a director before, is that so many times when I was a director and I would go to playwrights and be like, your play will be so much better if you cut this ending in half. Like this play ends about 10 minutes before it ends. You just need to stop. We don't care. And almost no single playwright ever took my advice. And so when we were doing this play, the director came to me and was like, you need to cut this ending. You need to cut the last 10 minutes. And my first impulse was just like, who the F do you think you are? How dare you tell me how to end my play? And then I thought like, well, chances are I think I was right every time I told them before.
When I was the director, I was right.
Then what are the chances that she is in terms of doing it? And so we did, you know, I was like, all right, we chopped off the last 10 minutes of the play. And I feel like I wouldn't have been able to do that unless I had been on the other end and to know that, you know, everybody's trying to solve the play from their end. And when you're a director, you're watching it and you're like, we are ready for this play to be over. We love it. We want to tell you it's over. Just stop. And, you know, the lights come back up and is it curtain call? Oh, it's a whole new scene. You know, like you can just feel like we missed our moment.
Yeah. Sean, so how did you even get into directing in the first place? Like, what's your theater origin story? Because I want to establish a little bit of that because that'll inform. I want to get back to Recovery Project and Tampa and everything else. But kind of who is Sean the artist? Where did he come from?
So I started a theater company with some friends when I was 22. Dad's Garage Theater Company.
Dad's Garage in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, which we started with the great business plan of just do theater until the money runs out. It's not a plan that
I think they still teach that in grad school.
You know, we went to FSU, most of us, and we didn't get cast in college. And so we thought like, oh, well, then we'll just start our own theater company and take chances on ourselves. So none of that was good advice, but we did it and it took off. And really, we were...
But to be clear, it still exists.
It still exists.
Which is like a testament to everything.
which is, but that, it takes a million people
Yes,
to
absolutely.
keep it going. So, I'm very happy for it, but the credit has to go to all the people that have worked there all the time.
Yep.
We started it and we were all actors, which is also not a good plan because someone has to like do the business and someone
Right.
has to do the marketing. And we were like communists. We were all going to speak full every month. And it was awesome. And I got into directing because like when we were acting, I was like, oh, I know what I want everyone else to be doing. And I'm watching some phenomenal performers.
Mhm.
And I just know deep down inside, like I'm not as good. I'm not that.
Oh, yeah.
And so like I love this, and I would watch the directors we'd hire and be like, that's not what I would have said there. And like, I'm not sure that's helpful. And so at some point, because we were all actors, like we had to take turns doing things. And so I just volunteered to direct, and then it stuck. And I was able to like, try to bring out the best out of my other performers that I saw because I knew they were phenomenal. And then it just grew from there. And so, we started, and it's amazing. So Dad's Garage has always had this incredibly young audience, young and diverse. And even back then, that was not the case. And it's the same now, right? And I think that's because what we didn't realize we were doing at the time that we kind of stumbled into is that we were making theater for us. Like we were a bunch of people in their 20 that were 25, 24, making theater for 25 and 24-year-olds. So it wasn't like, let's make old person theater and do $20 tickets to get them in. It was like, no, seeing yourself on stage, seeing your stories represented, seeing people talk about the things, all the things that we know about representation, but are sometimes terrified to put in place.
Yeah.
Which is to say that like, people in their 20s, like they want to talk about people in their 20s. And they want to see people in their 20s, just as any group of people
wants to
if
see
it goes
themselves.
to the theater and you don't see yourself on stage repeatedly, you eventually get the signals like, this is not for me.
Yeah.
And so what was great about Dad's Garage and why I eventually wanted to leave it was I didn't want Dad's Garage to just become people in their 50s doing theater for people in their 50s.
Right.
It's like, oh no, it should always be this thing that brings in new audiences, that allows new performers and new writers and new directors. I've seen so many, because of the Ford Foundation and all the support that it gave, right? Like every theater is in its like, it's our 50th anniversary, it's our 55, it's our 60th anniversary. And it was like, well, I didn't want Dad's Garage to become just another one of those along the way. I wanted it to keep always being the thing that it did. And I think the thing that I'll say that the Recovery Project does now that I really enjoy is like when we were 23 and doing it, I was like, oh, the most punk rock thing you can do is like save the world by doing theater. Like I really believed like we were going to put on plays and they were going to change the world.
Right. Yeah.
And then along the way, it became about like, subscribers like their seats and how do we get them to keep their seats and like come on Thursday and they're, and you're like, oh, and in the same way, like you start answering racist emails and you're like, is this what I thought we were doing? And once we got into the Recovery Project and we started doing the White Chip, and we started then now working with other playwrights that are going to have their plays be a part of it. We just did a workshop of a new Jake Brash play last week. And it was like, it has that punk rock feeling again. It has that feeling of like, oh, we're doing plays to save the world.
Yeah. And even maybe not even the world, but that one person.
Yeah.
Which ends up being a world. I mean, there's a universe inside everybody.
Yeah. We did a reading of the White Chip in Glasgow, Scotland.
Oh, wow.
Because the Scottish government was thinking about doing a tour of it. First of all, it was amazing because they sold beer at the reading. And for our Scottish friends. And people brought beer in and drank and watched it and enjoyed it, because I think beer isn't drinking for them. But I remember like one woman came because she had lost a son and she wanted to try to understand why. And she thought maybe the play could teach her that.
Yeah.
And another guy came and brought his family because he wanted his family to better understand him. And he thought that they could by coming to the play. And so you're like, oh, wow, no, we're sort of doing the thing we said when we were 22, which is like, we're putting on, it's just a reading. We're just
Yeah.
5 hours of rehearsal and put on a reading, and the community comes and they want people to better know them, and they're trying to do it through art. And so it definitely has so much of what that Dad's Garage feel was,
Yeah.
which is just the sense of like, oh no, plays have the great power to change everybody in the room. We just don't often choose material that dares to do that.
Yeah. So how long has the Recovery Project as an entity existed?
Like a year and a half. I think it started in September of 22. We have a video coming out that is a HR video
With puppets.
With puppets.
It's awesome. I saw the preview. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's great. Great. That's going to come out any minute now. Raymond Carr, who's a phenomenal puppeteer, is our guy that did it. And God bless him. He has a new show coming out on Netflix where he is like Benedict Cumberbatch is playing a puppeteer, but it's really Raymond Carr. So the fact that he did his Netflix show and then he did our little puppet show for us is amazing. The group that did video editing for the show just opened The Outsiders on Broadway. So we really had like the best of our industry working for us as, charging other people incredible amounts of money and us hundreds of dollars, to be able to do it. And what's beautiful is you're watching people like really step up. And even if they're not people in recovery, because of the way it works, everybody knows somebody.
Right.
And so figuring out how to use their skills to be able to add to it. Right. So this video is for how people can make performing arts organizations more recovery friendly. And then, we have some commissions that will be announced shortly. And we're just trying to figure out continually, how do we use storytelling? How do we use narratives to change the story that's out there?
Yeah. Because there's a couple different angles on this. And I'll have to do a little plug for myself just because it's going to give me a language to talk to you. But the show I wrote, directed, Clowns Like Me, which is heading to New York with Scott Aaron Price, his one-man show, his story of dealing with mental illnesses through his life. We're very specific in our mission when we talk about the three different audiences. There's the other people who also suffer.
Right.
There's the ones who love them, who are close to them,
right,
who suffer in their own different way. And then there is the uninformed civilian population.
Right.
I wonder if there's a similar conversation happening on your end mission-wise with, if the mission is to say it again, help artists in recovery or help artists recover. It was a specific thing you said. I'm misquoting you. I apologize.
No, it's all correct. Yeah.
But it feels like it's one, the artists seeing themselves, I can recover and be in recovery. And it sounds like be in recovery is the more ongoing way to think about it. There are the people who are close to them.
Right.
Like you just mentioned, the man who brought his family to the reading to understand him better.
Right.
And then there's, again, the uninformed civilian population who doesn't realize often the pressure that doing art can put on people.
So the program that we just started with Live Tampa Bay, that is right in that, is an anti-stigma program, because the idea is that there's actually some phenomenal in the continuum of care, from like, I want to get help, to like people who feel like that they're functioning throughout the day. There are some fantastic resources and organizations and things, but if you don't want to ask for help, if you are afraid or ashamed to do it, or you feel like other people are going to do it, it really doesn't matter what resources are out there. We've been very lucky to work with different members of SAMHSA, which is a part of the Biden administration. And, they, in many ways, a lot of their recovery work is based around kind of HIV prevention tools.
Okay.
Because they function in many of the same ways, which is to say that if you get either disease, it is not a death sentence and you can live a very full life.
Yeah.
But if you don't tell anybody, or you refuse to get help about it, you will die. So in many ways, it's just about like, what is the courage to be able to get help, to be able to talk about it?
Yeah.
We compare ourselves all the time to other diseases, right? And like when it comes to diabetes, we would never say like, you have to crash. You have to, we're not going to get you help until you've hit rock bottom.
Right.
Until you've lost a leg. No help for you.
No, you're worthy.
That's right. Now you can do it, right? Like we very much understand like early prevention, early education, figuring out what it needs to do. What are the things that changes you need to make in your life? What type of medicine do you need? And so we want to start putting those same things in place for addiction and for recovery,
Yeah.
for people to be able to get those things. So one of the things we're working on at Live Tampa Bay is that we collected 120 1-minute stories of people in recovery or from their family members talking about what it is. And the project right now, we're geo-targeting it into Tampa Bay area. We picked the top 3 zip codes in each county where overdoses were the highest. And then we're using social media to be able to beam these stories in so that ideally you're at 4 a.m. and you're struggling, or you're at 4 a.m. and a loved one is struggling and you don't know what to do, and you come across a story of somebody who looks like you, who is the same as you, age, gender, sexuality, socioeconomics. This is the beauty of geotargeting. And even though Facebook ruined democracy, they allow us to be able to do this, which is to say that we can look in and say, like, this person would speak better to this audience.
Right.
And in many ways, we all talk about equity work, but that, like, this is a form of equity work, which is to acknowledge that, like, different groups need different things, and we want to be able to serve all of them. And so I don't know what it is today, but as yesterday was day 5 of the program, and so far we had 1.3 impressions online.
1.3
million.
Oh.
Yeah. People sharing the story. We've had some nice influencers who have shared it, people seeing it themselves, and people watching it. And I feel like that is really the power of storytelling.
Yeah.
Another thing we talk about a lot is, so most people understand what an AA meeting is, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like and regardless of what you think about AA, you probably understand that people go to a room with other people that they don't know, and they share their story, and then a portion of them don't die.
Yeah.
And so I think the question that we struggle with is, like, why? Why does that work? Like, why, even on just the most base level, regardless of whether you believe in anything else in it, like, that works for some people. Why does that work?
Yeah.
And I think it is a reminder for all of us that the opposite of addiction isn't abstinence, it's community.
Yeah.
And that it is storytelling, and it is sharing, and it is feeling less alone. And, like, that's the sweet thing that artists are so great at, right? That's the thing that, like, oh my God, the number of times that we all said, I'm doing this student matinee because if one
kid
is shamed,
right,
and, you know what I mean? Like, so we sort of understand the power of it. We just may not, who knows if one kid has changed or not, but we understand the basic idea of creating empathy and for people being changed through it.
I can speak for myself. That actually was the story that happened to me. I was in an audience, and this touring theater came through, and they were exhausted. They were college kids.
Yeah.
You knew they were pulling that full load, and they were on the back end of their tour, and maybe half of them were phoning it in. I'm guessing.
Yeah, sure.
I couldn't tell you one of their names. I couldn't tell you the plot of their story. I know they all signed my playbill. They would never remember me. None of them would know me from Adam.
Right.
But that was a moment where I went, someday I'm going to be in a touring theater just like them, right? And it was galvanizing.
Yeah.
I was that kid in the audience who was changed. So I know they exist.
Yeah. No, and they do. And so we know the power of it. So the same thing is, like, what if we did that power not just to get more people to do theater?
Yes.
What if we use that power to be able to change narratives and to bring people together and feel less alone?
Leverage it into, geo-targeting. I'm still kind of like, I'm a little freaked out by it, Sean.
We're working with this amazing social media manager, and she can, like, aim it at a corner.
Oh, my goodness.
In terms of, and you're like, oh yeah, this is what marketing is now.
Yeah.
But we're using it for good, which is to say that if you're struggling in downtown Sarasota, or you're struggling here in Bradenton, or you're struggling in St. Pete, you may be 3 different people. And we don't want to assume that all things are for all people.
Right.
And so to be able to say, like, oh, this story responds better in this neighborhood, or this responds to them, like, that I feel like is how we acknowledge that representation is huge. We started the story campaign And we put out this reply and said, like, if you have a great 1 minute story, like, please turn it in. Oh, we got the most amazing stories, and
Oh,
they're all from
yeah.
white guys. And
Oh,
we were like, oh, okay, so this is, I see, great, I understand. So then we were like, let's now go out and figure out how do we get other stories, because that may not be what Gulfport needs.
yeah.
But like, okay, then let's figure out what it is that they do need and make sure that you or I do see like a very charming white guy at 4 a.m. when we're looking for, but other people see themselves reflected. So it's the
Right.
same idea of representation.
Yeah.
And, people saying recovery is possible is not that groundbreaking, but I think geo-targeting so that we can get people the right story
Mm-hmm.
is something that I haven't heard other places do.
I want to go back and dig into one thing you said a little bit before, Sean, which was, I said something about recovery being a process, and then you went even deeper and said it better. And I really want to dig in with, in terms of your commissions, how you frame Live Tampa, how you frame the projects, the recovery project. There's a continuum in recovery from the moment you even know you need it, whether it is rock bottom, whether it is someone comes to you, to your point of even people seeing their own selves reflected. When do you need the certain things along the way of your journey, right? You don't need the water stop in mile 1 of the marathon. You need it at mile 6, right? The different resources you're going to put out there, is that part of your strategic thinking as well? Is that people in this part of recovery need X, people in this part need Y, people who have gotten to being fully in recovery need ABC? Is that part of how you decide what projects to do, or does that make any sense? Am I
No, you're correct. So at Live Tampa Bay, the whole organization focuses on the continuum of care, as we call it.
Continuum of care. That's a great term. Okay.
So like from the moment that you say, uh-oh, I don't think this is going great, to the moment that you're just like, doing your daily maintenance and helping others, right?
Put me in, coach.
So I lead the anti-stigma efforts, which of course stigma is all the way through it, but for the most part, we think of me as being at the beginning, which is to say that there are other people that focus on working with law enforcement to make sure that like they have Narcan with them when they find someone that's overdosing, or figuring out how to get you. So there's someone else who works on when people leave the hospital. How do you get the right therapy that you need to? Like that you survive, great. What happens now if we just send you back out into it without any other tools? You're just going to be back in a moment, right? So like that, I don't deal with those parts. I deal at the beginning, which is where it just is, you have to understand that it's okay to get help. The example I always use is that in the last 4 years, we've solved the scourge of peanuts. That we have, if you say you have a peanut allergy.
Oh, okay. Like, sorry. My mind went to Charles Schultz.
Yeah, we solved the idea. Nobody tries to kick a football.
Exactly.
Held by someone who will move at the last second. No, but like if you say you have a peanut allergy, like Delta will pull every peanut off a flight for you.
Yep.
We did a workshop at New York Stage and Film this last year, which was a peanut-free summer for them.
Wow.
There were some artists there that had allergies. And so it's like, oh, so we can do it, but we just know deep down inside that a peanut allergy is not a moral failing.
Right.
That a peanut allergy, you can't, you can't help that. That's just what it is, right? Yeah. And so when it comes to, and actually it's amazing, if you studied all history of cancer, we used to actually think that it was your fault.
Yeah.
Now we've kind of more understood like, oh, actually it may just be predisposed, or, certain people get it. There are certain diseases you just get.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean anything. So like even cancer has gone through its own journey in terms of like, oh, it's not just about the mistakes that you made, that some people just genetically it gets.
Yeah.
Therefore, you should very early on have all the things in place. My family, we have alcoholism and skin cancer. So we talk about skin cancer. Right. Everybody has to get a dermatologist.
Yeah.
My grandfather died from it. So when I go into the doctor, we say like, I have a grandfather that died of it, and suddenly the doctor takes me much
everything
more seriously.
Changes, right?
And I get a full twice a year. They look at everything. So it's like, so actually, we know how to handle disease.
Yeah,
we know how to do it. We can Delta will pull peanuts. Dermatologists everywhere know how to look for it if you have it in your family. And then when it comes to addiction, which was declared a disease in the 50s, so it's not as though it's a new idea. We don't have any of those same just like societal things in place. Yes, there are, of course, amazing therapists and they're amazing doctors, but you don't know exactly where to go. In the same way that, like, every time I move to a new town, I just get a dermatologist. I just do it because it's what you need in my family, right? But when it comes to addiction, because there's so much shame around it, because there's so much stigma around it, you kind of feel like you're supposed to handle it on your own and hope that you don't have to tell anybody.
This is the overarching narrative that you started with, that our shared collective cultural story is still one of shame, and it's your fault, and why can't you do better?
Yeah, and like, that's just say no. I mean, for me, I really feel like that's where it comes from, which is like, nobody says like, oh, there's cancer in my family. We'll just say no to you. Now get back in there. Like, you would never, it's ridiculous to say. And even things like, diabetes or HIV, that there may be choices that were made at one point that put you at a higher risk for it. We would still never say, now, once you're infected, just say no. You have HIV. Well, just, talk it out and get back to work.
Right.
We would never even have that conversation. So I feel like our entire goal is to try to destigmatize addiction and to try to do it through the arts. One great thing that came out of the FST just did a production of The White Chip, and they did a survey afterwards about, like, would you be more likely to empathize with somebody who is struggling with substance use, or if you were struggling, would you be more likely to get help? And both of them, it was 72 and 73% said yes.
Well, that's good.
And so you see the numbers that are there. That's just like, that's what the power of attending the theater could be.
Yeah. I'll share with you, clowns like me, we had similar things in the talkbacks. We had one gentleman say, well, now I need to be more patient with my sister-in-law.
Yeah.
And that sounds almost small, but how big is that?
Yeah.
Right? And that's one little domino or one little snowflake or one little ripple in the pond, and who knows where that might go.
Yeah.
Or we had a woman at a talkback say, my son committed suicide. He had the same issues you did, Scott, and I never really understood or had closure until seeing your play.
Yeah.
And that's that woman's closure. And what's the price tag on that? What if we can accomplish that just from telling the story, just how powerful storytelling must be then.
Yeah, when we did the show in New York, after every performance, somebody came up and said, okay, I'm ready to get help.
Yeah. Oh, wow. See?
And actually at our very first preview, a woman came up and said, like, I'm an alcoholic, but I'm not sober. And then 3 weeks in, she wrote to us again and said, I have 21 days now.
Oh, my goodness.
And so it was like, oh, that's, we had to very quickly put together resources because our actors were just coming out and,
Oh, of course. But you need to prep them because someone's going to pump them for
get help. And, two of our actors are in recovery. They're just great actors. And they were like, okay, let me get you somebody.
Talk to,
That's right. Our producers very quickly had to put together like QR codes to have available to them. But it was like, oh yeah, people are game. There's like a window with which you're game to be able to make changes, and that happens, right? That can happen right after seeing a piece of theater.
Yeah,
because we know the power of theater. Like, we know that we're changed by it. We know that.
This has been great, Sean. Again, this angle on the power of story and what storytellers can do, I think is so useful. And again, everyone out there, everything we've been talking about, check the show summary. All the links, all the info about Sean's plays and projects will be in that show summary. But to wrap up, I always like to have two questions and a little spotlight here for you. And the first question is, what is the best advice that you have ever taken?
I guess it's cliched, but that, especially in theater, that you have to find your people, that you really have to. I was lucky because I started a theater company with friends of mine.
Yeah.
But then at certain moments, I've gone off to work at fancy theaters and not had my people with me. And you're like, oh, it's not as enjoyable, nor is it as good. So I feel like I'm always working to try to find my people in every sense, because I feel like that, community is one of the things that means the most to us. So I'm always, even now, 1,000 years into doing this field, like looking for my people all the time.
Is fancy theater where they have caviar by the coffee instead of donuts? I don't think I've worked at
They do.
I've worked at a fancy theater.
It's really salty, so after a while of eating caviar all day long, you're a little like dehydrated, but it's pretty great.
Question 2, what is the worst advice that you have ever given?
What's the worst advice I've ever given?
I love this question.
As someone who was bought into the myth for a long time that drinking and drugs are part of what makes you an artist, that, part of the like Jack Kerouac, Hunter S. Thompson,
tortured artist syndrome.
and it's I think that the worst advice I ever probably gave was by living my lifestyle in a way that made it seem like if you really want to be a real artist, you have to go to the bar and you have to drink till 3 a.m. and you have to get up at 8 and you have to work all day and you have to, burn all personal relationships all the time in service of the art.
Yeah.
And that narrative is there. And there are many of us that for a long time keep that narrative going.
Yeah.
You're only a real artist if you work 20 hours a day. And, so I think like that's probably the worst advice I ever gave was I lived my life that way. And you eventually realize like, not only is it not true that you need to do that, in many ways, you are a worse artist because you cannot be present. People don't want to work with you.
Yeah.
The work that you do is repetitive and falls back on your tricks and you're not open to being present in the new room. And then God forbid you ever want to have like an actual relationship with anybody, you're not well prepared for it.
Yeah.
So I think so much of what I've had to do post getting sober and learning how to do theater after that is like, how do you care for the people around you so that they can do better work and not just, feel like, real artists work all the time.
Yeah.
And if you want to go home and be with your kids, you're not a real artist.
Right.
And I feel like that's just not true.
Yeah.
And luckily, I feel like in 2024, people are not putting up with that anymore.
That narrative is changing too.
Yeah.
Great. Sean, this is a spotlight for you. We've talked a lot about what's going on, but hit us one more time with where we can find you and how to follow you and what you have coming up.
So the thing I would say right now that we have is if you go to the Live Tampa Bay Stories Ending Stigma, either website or Instagram page, I'll give you those links like that. Not only do you get to see like so many of them are artists, it's so funny. It's not by design, but so many people coming forward are artists and talking about how like recovery has really changed their life. I would say to spread the thing about the phone number, if there are any artists or administrators that want to call 1-833-OK-I-QUIT, we'll put that number in there too. I know we'll just have this puppet video that'll come out any minute now.
Will that be on the Live Tampa site or your personal website or?
Good question. I don't know. We had a conversation today with Actors Equity about them hosting it.
Oh, okay. That would be great.
Yeah, so we'll see. It's definitely online on Vimeo right now, but yeah, the thing is that we're making it and then we'll give it out for free to anybody. So anybody can download it, anybody can repost it.
Tell you what, this episode will probably drop in a few weeks. So if you're live before then, let me know and I'll put that in the show summary.
Right. Just put it there.
Because we are bending space-time with this conversation.
There you go. It'll be there. It's already come out. Yeah.
Exactly. It's already out. That's right. Yeah. Oh, Sean, thank you so much for your vulnerability and your wisdom and sharing all of this. I know I personally appreciate it, and I'm sure the listeners do too. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this.
The Page and Stage podcast is built with Alitude, the all-in-one podcasting app created by the amazing team over at thepodcasthost.com. You can learn more about all my guests and access their websites and projects in the episode summaries. If you enjoyed and found value in this podcast, please tell at least one other person. Word of mouth has always been and will always be the best marketing tool in the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, I'm Jason Cannon, and I cannot wait to hear your story.